She forgot everything. Her name, her laughter, the way she used to hum Cameroonian highlife under her breath while cooking on Sunday mornings. She forgot the smell of the man who had held her through 2 winters in Busan, the one who used to kiss her temple whenever she was overthinking, the one who had quietly built an entire life around her without her knowing. She forgot all of it. And he stayed anyway. That is the kind of love the story is about. Not the love that arrives with roses and declarations. The kind that sits in a plastic hospital chair for 11 days straight, refusing to go home. His name was Seo Jun-ho, 25 years old, thin-framed and quiet-eyed. The sort of man who never talked much, but whose presence filled a room without effort. He worked at a small architecture firm in Haeundae, designing residential spaces for clients who wanted their homes to feel like peace. He was good at it. He understood, better than most, that the most important thing about any space was how it made you feel when you walked in. He had felt that the first time he saw her. Her name was Akum Tchinda. She was Cameroonian, Bamileke by blood, Francophone by upbringing, and more alive than anyone he had ever encountered in 25 years of living. She had come to Busan on a cultural exchange scholarship attached to Busan National University, studying textile design and traditional craft documentation. She wore her hair in thick twists, she wrapped in bright Kent pattern head wraps, and she laughed with her whole body, unashamed, the way people who have never been taught to make themselves smaller tend to laugh. They had met at a pojangmaka near Gwangalli Beach on a Tuesday evening in early autumn, where Akum had accidentally ordered the spiciest tteokbokki on the menu and was quietly losing the battle when Jun-ho, sitting 2 seats down, pushed a cold glass of barley tea toward her without a word. She had looked at him, eyes watering, and said in her accented Korean, "You could have warned me." He had said, "You looked like you needed the adventure." That was 2 years ago. In those 2 years, they had built something real and unhurried, the kind of relationship that grows in the margins of ordinary life, in shared meals and long walks along Haeundae Beach, in arguments about whose music to play during rain, in sleeping through alarms and missing ferry schedules and not caring because the moment right in front of them was always enough. Akum's family back in Bafoussam knew about him. They were not pleased, but they were not yet loud about it. Her mother, Mama Célestine, was the kind of woman who believed that a Cameroonian daughter belonged with a Cameroonian man, preferably one from a good family, preferably from the West region, preferably someone they had already vetted. Jun-ho was none of those things, and the family made sure Akum knew it whenever she called home. But Akum loved him, and for 2 years, that had been enough. Until the night of the 23rd of March. She had been coming back from a late seminar at the university, cutting through the winding road that curved behind Igidae Park, the one she always took because it was faster and because the night view of the sea from that stretch of road made her chest feel wide open. It had been raining, the kind of fine Busan rain that comes sideways off the water and makes everything slick and silver. The taxi driver took the curve too fast. The car went sideways. She does not remember any of it. Jun-ho got the call at 11:47 p.m. He was already in bed, reading. He had the phone to his ear, and then he was in his car, and then he was running through the hospital corridor in wet socks because he had not stopped to change his shoes, and none of that part matters because the only thing that mattered was the doctor's words. She is stable, she is alive, there is significant head trauma, and we will need to observe her for neurological impact. She was in a coma for 4 days. When she woke, she looked at Jun-ho, who had not left, who had eaten vending machine ramen and slept in the chair beside her bed and called her name softly every morning because someone told him that hearing a familiar voice could help. She looked at him with eyes that were clear and awake and completely, utterly blank. "Who are you?" she said in French, which she always defaulted to when she was frightened or confused. And Jun-ho, who had spent 2 years learning enough French to whisper good morning to her the way she liked, who had planned in the private chambers of his heart to ask her father's permission to marry her before the year was out. Jun-ho felt the floor drop out from under him. But he did not cry. Not in front of her. He smiled carefully, the way you smile at someone who is fragile, and he said in Korean, "I'm someone who's glad you're awake." The doctors explained it to the family when they arrived 3 days later. Mama Célestine flying in from Bafoussam with Akum's elder brother Ghislain. both of them arriving at Gimhae Airport with grief on their faces and suspicion already forming behind their eyes. Retrograde amnesia. Extensive, they said. She had lost most of her recent memory. The past 3, perhaps 4 years were largely inaccessible. She remembered her childhood. She remembered Bafoussam, her mother's kitchen, the smell of egusi soup, the narrow street where she grew up. She remembered her undergraduate years in Haeundae. She did not remember Busan. She did not remember Busan National University. She did not remember a soft-spoken Korean man who had kissed her forehead every morning for 2 years. Mama Célestine looked at Jun-ho with the particular expression of a woman who has been handed a solution to a problem she had been praying about. "Thank you," she said in careful English, "for being here, but we will take it from here." He heard the dismissal in it. He was 25 and he was being thanked and shown the door. He did not go. He went to the hospital cafeteria instead, sat down with a cup of terrible coffee, and stared at the table for a long time. He thought about leaving, not out of cowardice, but out of the genuine fear that staying would make things harder for Akum, that his presence might confuse her, that perhaps the kindest thing he could do was step back and let the people who had known her longest handle this. He sat with that thought for a while. He turned it over. And then he thought about the way Akum used to say, during arguments, that the bravest thing a person could do was stay in the discomfort instead of running from it. He thought, "She taught me that. She would want me to remember it now." He went back upstairs. Mama Célestine was not happy. Ghislain was openly hostile, a broad-shouldered man in his early 30s who spoke to Jun-ho in rapid Cameroonian French that he knew Jun-ho could not fully follow, which was not accidental. But Jun-ho was patient in the way that people are patient when they have decided that patience is the only currency they have left, and he spent those first days in the hospital simply being present without demanding anything. He brought Akum flowers, not grand gestures, just small bunches of pink chrysanthemums from the market near the hospital because he remembered she had once said they made her feel less alone in a foreign place. He sat near her room. He did not push himself on her. He answered her questions when she had them, and he did not try to explain who he was before she was ready to ask. She noticed him, though. People who have lost their memory still have their instincts, and Akum's instincts had always been sharp. There was something about the way this man moved around her that did not feel like a stranger's movement. He was careful without being clinical, present without being suffocating. When her mother and brother argued in the room, which happened often, because Mama Célestine was a woman who managed fear through volume, Akum would look across the room and find Jun-ho in the doorway, and something in his stillness would settle her. "What is your connection to me?" she asked him one afternoon, when her family had gone to the small guest house nearby to rest. Her Korean was returning in fragments. The doctor said that language memory often recovered faster than episodic memory, and she was pulling words out of somewhere deep and pre-conscious. "You are always here. My mother does not like you being here, but you are always here." Jun-ho sat in the chair beside her bed. Not too close, giving her space. "I know you," he said. "I knew you. You don't have to remember anything. I'm not here to make you remember. I'm here because..." He paused, finding the right words, the honest ones. "Because this is where I want to be." She considered him for a long, careful time. "You are not going to tell me who you are to me?" "Not until you're ready to hear it," he said. "And maybe not even then. It should come from you, not from me telling you." She studied his face, the quiet of it, the steadiness, and then she looked away toward the window, where the Busan skyline sat gray and silver in the winter light. "My mother is bringing someone," she said. "A Cameroonian man. She says he is a good match. She has been talking about him since I woke up." Jun-ho said nothing. "You heard me," Akum said. "I heard you," he said. The man her mother was bringing was named Etienne Mbarga. He was 28, the son of a Cameroonian businessman who had set up import operations in Busan 6 years ago, and Etienne had stayed on after his father returned home, running the local side of the business and building himself a comfortable life in Nampodong. He was handsome in the deliberate way of men who know they are handsome, fitted clothes, careful hairline, the kind of smile that arrived a half second after it should, as though it had been checked in a mirror first. He spoke French beautifully and English well and functional Korean, and he walked into Akum's hospital room 2 weeks after she woke up carrying a large arrangement of flowers and the energy of a man who had been told this was already decided. He spoke to her in French, easy, warm, full of references to Cameroon, to home, to the foods she must be missing, to what it meant to recover in a foreign country without your own people around you. He made her laugh once, a small laugh, and Mama Célestine caught it from the doorway like a gift she had been praying for. Jun-ho was not in the room. He was down the corridor, and he heard the laughter, and he stood for a moment with his back to the wall and let himself feel what that felt like, because he had learned from Akum that you could not move through hard feelings by pretending they were not there. Then he bought 2 cups of tea from the vending machine, went back to the corridor outside her room, and waited. Etienne left 40 minutes later, full of confidence and French cologne, and glanced at Jun-ho on his way past in a way that communicated everything without a single word. Jun-ho watched him go, and then sat down in the corridor chair he had come to think of as his, and he drank his tea alone. This was the pattern of the weeks that followed. Akum was discharged from the hospital after 3 weeks and moved into a service department near Centum City that Ghislain rented for the family while they figured out next steps. The doctors said her memory might return in fragments over months, or it might not return fully at all. She needed familiar things, gentle routine, no pressure. Mama Célestine interpreted this as, Etienne should visit regularly. Etienne visited regularly. He took Akum to a Cameroonian restaurant in Siamayan run by a woman from Douala who made condré on weekends, and he talked about home the way a salesman talks about a product, with precision, knowing which features to highlight. He sent her voice notes in the morning. He showed up with Cameroonian snacks her mother had requested from the local African grocery. He was attentive and warm and culturally familiar in a way that Jun-ho structurally could not be, and Akum's family banked on that gap like it was a wall they had built themselves. But Jun-ho had not stopped. He had left the hospital, yes. He had given the family the space they claimed, the distance they demanded. But he had known Akum for 2 years, and he knew what she needed in the way that only time and attention teach you. He knew she loved the smell of the sea when she was anxious, that she thought better when she was moving, that being enclosed in indoor spaces during recovery made her feel like a sick person, and she hated feeling like a sick person. He texted Ghislain, who did not respond. He texted Mama Célestine, who responded once with a short English message that said, "Please give our daughter space to heal." And he respected that, and he also, quietly and without announcement, began showing up in the places Akum would be. Not to intercept her, not to corner her or demand she remember him, but to be nearby in the way that a familiar song is nearby, not forcing you to listen, just present in the background until your ear finds it. He knew she walked along Haeundae Beach in the late mornings when the weather was clear, because her doctor had recommended gentle outdoor movement, and because Akum had always been a person who needed sky above her. Jun-ho started walking there too, at the same hours, and for the first week they simply passed each other. He would nod. She would nod. And then one Thursday she stopped walking and turned around and said, "You live around here?" "Not far," he said, which was not untrue, though his usual run was nowhere near Haeundae. She fell into step beside him, not because she had decided to trust him, but because her body apparently had not forgotten what her mind had lost, and being beside him felt, in some wordless and disquieting way, like being beside something familiar. "The man my family wants me to see," she said, watching the water. "He is nice." "I know," Jun-ho said. "He is from home." "I know. My mother thinks he is what I need right now." She paused. "Do you think so?" Jun-ho kept his eyes on the water. "I think you are the only person who knows what you need. And I think right now your job is to heal, not to decide anything." She looked at him sideways. "You are very careful about what you say." "I'm trying not to make your life harder." "Harder how?" He stopped walking, looked at her directly. The dark, rich brown of her face, the wind moving her twists, the careful way she was watching him back. "I'll tell you everything," he said, "when you want to know. I'll answer every question you have. But I'm not going to push you toward a version of the past that you're not ready for. That's not fair to you." She stared at him for a long moment. And then she did something he had not expected. She reached out and briefly, lightly, pressed her fingers against his arm. Not a romantic gesture. More like the gesture of someone testing whether something is real. Okay, she said. And they kept walking. The weeks turned into a month. The dynamic in the Tchinda household shifted in the small, barely visible ways that only the people inside it could track. Etienne visited, brought food, spoke beautifully, but Akum had started to notice things she could not explain. She noticed that when Etienne talked about what her life had been like in Busan before the accident, he did not know any of it. He had filled the gaps with assumptions, that she must have been lonely, that a Cameroonian girl alone in Korea would naturally have been longing for familiarity, that Busan must have felt cold and foreign without her people around her. He painted a portrait of her pre-accident life that was sad and isolated, and she sat with that portrait and felt, with increasing unease, that it was wrong. Because scattered across the rubble of her memory, things were beginning to surface. Not big things yet. Small ones. She remembered a pojangmaka. She remembered the smell of street food and sea air and the particular quality of autumn light along a waterfront. She remembered laughing, really laughing, the full-body kind, the kind she knew she did not do in front of strangers. She did not remember who had been with her, but she knew someone had been. She started asking Jun-ho questions on their beach walks. Not direct questions yet. Oblique ones, the way you approach something you sense is significant but are not yet ready to touch directly. She asked about Busan winters. She asked about what foreigners typically struggled with when they first arrived. She asked about Gwangalli and Haeundae and the university areas, and she watched his answers and listened for the thing underneath the words, the texture of someone who knew these places the way she suspected she had once known them. He answered without pressure. And she listened. One afternoon, 6 weeks after she had been discharged, she went to her laptop and found her old email account, which her memory had held onto in the way memory sometimes arbitrarily preserves utility over sentiment. Her inbox was full of university correspondence, receipts, newsletters. And then she found a folder. She had labeled it, in a moment of sentiment she did not currently recognize, simply J. Inside it were emails between her and Jun-ho. 2 years of them. Photographs attached to some. A thread from their first autumn together where she had described, in her careful mix of French and Korean and English, the way Busan felt like it was becoming hers. A thread from a winter where she had been homesick and he had typed out a recipe for her mother's egusi soup from a video call with Mama Célestine, who had not known she was helping him and had thought she was helping a friend of Akum's. A thread from just before the accident where she had written, I keep thinking about what it means to build a home somewhere. I think what I've been building is a person, not a place. Is that strange? Do you think a person can be someone's home? He had replied, not strange. I think you've been mine for a while now. Akum sat at her desk for a very long time. Then she closed the laptop and put on her coat and walked to the beach. He was there. Of course he was there, not waiting, just walking, the way he always was at this hour. She came up beside him and they walked in silence for several minutes, and then she said, I found the emails. He said nothing. She could feel the stillness in him, the careful, held stillness of someone who has learned not to project what they're feeling onto someone who is fragile. You wrote that I was your home, she said. You are, he said. Present tense. Not was. She noticed. Jun-ho. It was the first time she had said his name without being told to, without reading it. It had come out of her mouth like something that had always lived there. He stopped walking. She stopped too, and turned to face him, and she was not crying, but her eyes were the kind of bright that comes just before. I don't remember everything. I need you to know that. I don't remember all of us. But I remember. She pressed her hand to her chest. Something. Here. And I read those emails, and I felt something I haven't felt since I woke up. I felt like myself. He looked at her. He had been so careful for so long, so deliberate about not taking up more space than she could give him, and for a single unguarded second the full weight of those weeks showed in his face, the exhaustion and the love and the grief of loving someone who looked at you and did not know you, all of it present at once. I'm here, he said. I've been here. I know, she said. I know you have. She did not throw herself into his arms. It was not that kind of moment. She reached out and took his hand, just held it, the way she might hold something she was afraid of losing again, and they stood on the Haeundae sand with the winter sea moving in and out, and she let herself feel the truth of him without forcing herself to rush toward a past she was still excavating. It was a beginning, a second one, and it was terrifying and tender in equal measure. The conflict, naturally, did not disappear. Mama Célestine discovered the emails before Akum had a chance to tell her herself. Ghislain had seen the laptop open on the desk and told his mother, and Mama Célestine read enough to understand the shape of what was coming. She came to Akum's room that evening in the state she sometimes entered when she was frightened, not shouting, which would have been easier, but speaking in a low, controlled Bamileke-inflected French that meant she was not going to be moved. She said that this Korean man had had his opportunity, and things were different now. She said that Akum was vulnerable and could not be expected to make sound decisions. She said that Etienne was here, was from their world, was stable and established and familiar in the ways that mattered. She said that what was in old emails was the past, and the past was not what Akum needed right now. Akum listened. This was new. She had always been the daughter who listened and then quietly did what she wanted, but the accident had made her more deliberate, more careful, more precise with words. She said, "Mama, tell me what you are afraid of." Célestine stopped. "Not what you think is best for me. Not the argument you've prepared. Tell me what you are actually afraid of." Her mother sat down on the edge of the bed, and after a long silence, a silence in which she was clearly working out whether to keep the armor up or set it down, she said, "I'm afraid you'll build your life somewhere I cannot reach it, with someone I cannot understand. And I'm afraid that when things get hard, and things always get hard, you will be alone in a way that I cannot fix." Akum was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He sat in a plastic hospital chair for 11 days, Mama. I know this because the nurses told me. He didn't go home. He didn't eat properly. He just stayed. Does that sound like a man who would leave me alone when things get hard?" Célestine had no answer for that. Not an immediate one. Etienne, to his credit, sensed the shift before it was announced. He came to visit 2 days later and found Akum in a different register, still warm, still polite, but oriented differently, pointed somewhere he was not. He sat across from her in the small living room of the apartment, and he read it clearly, the way perceptive people read rooms. He said, after a silence that had gone on long enough, "It's the Korean man." Akum did not deny it. "He is not a stranger to me, Etienne. I'm remembering that more clearly every day." Etienne nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she had not expected, something that raised him considerably in her estimation. "I came here because your mother asked and because I thought you might need someone from home. But I think maybe what you needed from home was already here." He stood up. He said, "Take care of yourself, Akum." And he left without drama, which was, she thought, the most dignified thing he could have done. She called Jun-ho that evening. She had not called him before. It had always been her who dictated the terms of contact, who set the pace, and he had honored that without complaint. When he picked up and said hello, she said, in the mix of French and Korean she apparently defaulted to with him, "Come take me somewhere. I want to see Busan. The parts I'm forgetting." He came. They spent the day moving through the city slowly, without schedule, through Gamcheon Culture Village, up and down the painted stairs with the afternoon light turning the walls gold and tangerine, through Gwangalli Market where the smell of fresh seafood hit her in the chest with something that felt like recognition, along the waterfront at Haeundae where the rocks met the sea in the dramatic way she must have stood and looked at before because her body knew exactly where to stand for the best view. Jun-ho did not narrate. He did not say, "We came here in October of our first year, you said this, you did that." He simply went with her, present in the moment, and let the city speak to her on its own terms. At Gwangalli Beach, as the afternoon turned toward evening and the bridge began its first light sequence across the water, pale gold threads strung over the dark, Akum stopped walking and said, "I remember this. Not the picture of it. The feeling of it. Standing here and feeling like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." "We used to come here on Friday evenings," Jun-ho said. Quiet, careful. You used to say the bridge at night looked like a sentence. Punctuation above the water. She stared at the lights. I said that. You said Busan felt like a story you were writing as you lived it. She felt it then, not a crash of memory, nothing so dramatic. More like a door that had been swollen shut, finally giving a centimeter, a crack of light. She felt the shape of who she had been here, this version of herself that was not the Haeundae girl or the Bafoussam daughter, but something she had become in this city, something that had grown up in the space between her history and his. I want to remember, she said. Not to him, exactly. To herself, to the bridge, to the water. I want it all back. It might come, he said. It might come slowly. But who you are, that didn't go anywhere, Akum. It's still you. I see it. She turned to look at him, this quiet man who had loved her with a constancy that asked for nothing, who had sat in a plastic chair for 11 days and learned to walk at her pace and hold her hand without gripping it. And she thought, I may not have all of us back yet, but I know enough. I know what this is. She stepped toward him and put her arms around him, and he held her. Carefully at first, then fully, the way you hold something you had been afraid to hope for, and they stood like that with the Gwangalli lights running their slow colors above the water, and it was the most honest thing either of them had been in months. The memory came back piece by piece over the following weeks. Not in a single dramatic flood, the way it happens in films, but in the quiet accumulating way of real recovery, a sound triggering a morning, a smell recovering an afternoon, a word in his voice unlocking a whole texture of feeling that slowly assembled itself into a picture she recognized. The Pojangmaka where they had met came back on a Tuesday, unprovoked, while she was eating tteokbokki alone at home, and the specific heat of it caught her off guard. She sat with her fork in the air and saw the night clearly, the yellow tent lights, the cold glass of barley tea sliding toward her, the man 2 seats down who had said, You looked like you needed the adventure. She called him immediately. The Pojangmaka, she said. Near Gwangalli. The tteokbokki. He was very quiet on the other end of the line. You pushed the tea toward me, she said. You didn't say anything first, you just pushed it. You were losing badly, he said. His voice was rough around the edge in a way she had not heard before. I was, she said. She was crying now, not from sadness, from the specific relief of finding something you had believed was gone. Jun-ho. I remember. It did not come back all at once after that, but the pace changed, memories returning like a tide that had turned, steady and incremental and inevitable. She remembered their first real argument, in the second winter, when she had felt the distance of Cameroon so heavily that she had taken it out on him, and he had not reacted the way she expected, had simply waited for the wave to pass and then said, I'm not the ocean, Akum. You can't be angry at me for the distance. She remembered laughing until she cried in a jimjilbang at 2 a.m. because he had fallen asleep mid-sentence. She remembered him learning to say, in Bamileke accented French, the phrase her grandmother used for goodnight, something so difficult for a Korean tongue to shape that she had told him to give up after the first attempt, and he had practiced alone for 3 weeks until he got it right. She remembered the night she had told him she loved him. She had said it first, on a night just like this. Winter, sea, lights, and he had looked at her for so long without speaking that she had started to feel embarrassed, and then he had said, I know. I've been trying to work out how to deserve it. She told Mama Célestine that the memory was returning. Her mother, who had not entirely surrendered, but who had been doing her own quiet reprocessing since their conversation about fear, listened carefully. Akum told her about the emails, about the 11 days in the hospital chair, about the man who had walked her through Busan without demanding anything, who had let her come back to herself at her own pace. She did not argue. She laid the facts down like fabric swatches and let her mother feel the quality of each one. And Mama Célestine, who was not a simple woman, who had been made complex by decades of loving her children fiercely in the only ways she knew, Mama Célestine sat with it. She called a cousin back in Bafoussam who had been married to a non-Cameroonian for 12 years and spoke to her for a long time. She thought about the 11 days. She thought about the tea, pushed across the counter, without a word. She thought about a man who had learned to say a Bamileke goodnight for her daughter's sake. She asked to meet him properly. Not at the hospital, not at the apartment with everyone watching. She asked for dinner. Jun-ho cooked. He asked Akum for guidance, not performing the gesture, genuinely asking, and she told him what her mother loved, what would communicate respect without being sycophantic. He made juk, the Korean rice porridge, because Mama Célestine had mentioned once that her digestion had not settled since the flight, and alongside it, he set out the Cameroonian palm nut soup Akum had shown him how to make 18 months ago, from a recipe Mama Célestine herself had given Akum over a video call. When Célestine came into the apartment and smelled her own soup, her own recipe, coming from the kitchen of this Korean boy she had been trying to remove from her daughter's life, she stopped in the doorway. "Where did you get that recipe?" she said. Jun-ho looked at her. "You taught Akum." "She taught me. It's the only Cameroonian soup I know how to make." Célestine looked at him for a long time. Something moved across her face that was not quite surrender, but was the thing that comes just before it, a recognition that the situation was more layered than her initial read had allowed for. She came in and sat down. The dinner was not easy or smooth. Ghislain was there too, still armored, asking practical questions in English about Jun-ho's work, his family, his income, his intentions, the questions of a protective older brother who had decided that if this was happening, he would at least interrogate it properly. Jun-ho answered everything directly. He did not embellish. He did not perform. He spoke about his family in Daegu, his work, what he had built in Busan, and when Ghislain asked, with no softening, "Why my sister?" Specifically. Not just any woman. Why her? Jun-ho was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because she made me want to be someone who deserved to sit next to her. And I didn't know I needed that until I met her." Ghislain looked at him. It was not approval yet, but it was the beginning of respect, and that was enough. 4 months after the accident, on a morning that came in pale gold off the water, Akum Tchinda stood in front of a small mirror in the apartment that had become hers in Centum City and looked at herself, her thick twists pinned high, her Bamileke wax fabric blouse, the Busan skyline behind her through the window, and felt, for the first time since she had woken in that hospital bed and found the world blank, completely and wholly herself. All of herself. The Bafoussam girl and the Busan woman and the person who had been built in the space between, in 2 languages and 2 winters and 10,000 small, ordinary moments with a man who had refused to let her disappear from his life even when she had disappeared from her own. The memory had not come back entirely, and the doctors said it might never, not all the way. Some of the edges were still soft, still forming. But she had enough. She had the pojangmaka and the cold tea, and the first autumn and the long arguments and the jimjilbang laughter, and the Bamileke goodnight that had taken him 3 weeks to learn. She had the emails. She had the feeling in her chest on the Gwangalli waterfront. She had the shape of him, the specific, irreducible shape of who Seo Jun-ho was, and the specific, irreducible shape of what they were together. She went to find him. He was in the kitchen making coffee, unhurried, the morning light coming through the window in the way she now knew it always came through, at this angle, on clear days. She leaned in the kitchen doorway and looked at him, and he looked back at her, and between them was the quiet particular to 2 people who have come through something and know it. "I remember the night I told you I loved you," she said. He was very still. "I said it first," she said, "and you looked at me for so long I almost took it back. And then you said you were trying to work out how to deserve it." He set the coffee down. His jaw was working slightly, the way it did when he was managing something large inside himself. "Jun-ho," she said, "have you worked it out yet?" He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and held her face in his hands, and she laughed. Her real laugh, the whole body one, the one she had never learned to make smaller, and he kissed her once, properly, the way he had been wanting to for 4 months without allowing himself. They were married in October. Not a large wedding, a quiet ceremony in Busan, at the little chapel near Haeundae Beach that Akum had walked past dozens of times and always slowed down in front of, though she hadn't remembered why. She wore Bamileke indigo wax fabric, hand-embroidered by her aunt in Bafoussam, who had sent it by courier with a note tucked into the folds that said, in Cameroonian French, "Every woman in our family wore blue on her wedding day." Now you know why you love the color. Mama Célestine was in the front row. She did not cry until Jun-ho said his vows, not in Korean, but in French, the careful, accented, deeply imperfect French he had been practicing with Akum's patient coaching for 3 months, the French of a man who had decided that if he was going to join this family, he would meet them somewhere in the middle of the distance. Ghislain, standing beside him as witness, clapped him on the shoulder when it was done with a firmness that said more than words. And Akum stood at the altar in her indigo and her twists and her bright Busan mourning and looked at this man who had loved her through the blonkiest version of herself, who had held her hand without gripping it, who had cooked her mother's recipe in her mother's absence, who had learned a Bamileke goodnight for the specific pleasure of making her feel seen, and she thought, I may have forgotten you for a little while, Seo Jun-ho. But I think some part of me was always finding its way back. The sea was very blue that October. The kind of blue that looks like it was chosen deliberately. Busan, as it always did, held them without commentary, the city that had made her and remade her, the city where she had lost herself and been found again, one ordinary walk at a time, by a man who had decided that staying was the only answer he had left. It was, as it turned out, the only answer she had ever needed. If the story caught you somewhere quiet and stayed there, it found exactly the right home. This is what Afro-K Storyverse was built for. The slow love, the real love, the kind that doesn't look spectacular from the outside, but is everything from the inside. Leave a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest, because I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed to Afro-K Storyverse yet, what are you waiting for? There are entire worlds in here waiting for you. New stories drop every week. Stay close.